We're excited for this segment as we have the honor of sharing the stage with distinguished panelists, Academy past presidents, spanning 48 years of leadership. They're here today to share their wisdom and discuss pivotal moments and initiatives in our profession that have been part of our annual meeting. Phil and I had a truly wonderful time preparing for this session.
We certainly did, Joanne. As you can imagine, there's a lot to cover tonight, so let's go ahead and get started. I would like to welcome our esteemed panelists to join us on stage. John Michael, 1989 to 1990. Terry Supin, 1990 to 1991. Stephanie Langdon, 1999 to 2000. 2007 to 2008. Scott Cummings, 2010 to 2011, and Jason Highsmith, 2015 to 2016.
Before we begin our panel discussion, we have a special surprise to share with you. It's such a rare occasion to have this many Academy past presidents, true pioneers of our profession, gathered at one time to share their insights. So we thought it only appropriate to capture the moment with a graphic recording. Our graphic recorder, who's back and to the right, is seated back there and will be capturing this afternoon's discussion in real time. We'll be checking in with her in a bit to see how things are shaping up.
This session is about our O&P profession. You're going to hear a lot of great information from our panelists, and we encourage you to ask questions throughout the session via the meeting app. But first, let's take a moment and get acquainted with the Q&A and polling features of that app. If you haven't already, go ahead and download the app. You can do that by scanning the QR code on the screen, or by searching AAOP events in your app store. Once you get to the AAOP 2024 app, you'll want to navigate to the opening session with keynote, which is listed on today's agenda. From there, you can select the button at the bottom labeled ARS, and this is how you'll be able to respond to polls and submit questions in the Q&A. Before we jump into this afternoon's live discussion, there's one individual who wanted to share a brief message and some history with the audience. Ted Trainhart, CPO Emeritus, and past president of the Academy from 1976 to 1977, was unable to join us in person today, but he took time to share his thoughts on the Academy's first annual meeting via a pre-recorded video message.
Good afternoon. The first 10 years of the Academy's existence was quite interesting. The origin of the Academy in 1970 was a group of people, fewer than 20, who saw the need for individual practitioners to have an organization for themselves. At the time, we had AOPA, who was the business and the industry. We had ABC, who was handling the credentialing, but there was no representation organization for the individual practitioner. And these less than 20 individuals saw the dire need and began the Academy. In 1972, when the Academy was 2 years old, we were at the time probably holding 5 or 6 workshops or seminars annually around the country. And in 1974, we thought, wow, why don't we do an annual meeting? We'll get a bigger crowd, we'll make more money. We can do it in the South where it's warm, and it will have a large draw. Well, you know, when you have something that turns out not quite like you thought it might be, you call that experience. And the Academy had an experience. We experienced fewer people paying than participating, meaning we had more staff and more lecturers than we had attendees. We progressed over the next several years. We also, during that time, became the spokesman or the voice of the profession. And we had distinguished ourselves from the business and from the credentialing. We were still a very small organization and needed a lot of help, a lot of leadership for the future years, which, as you see here at the table, many of the leaders who brought us from this small organization up to what you see today, these are the guys, the ladies who helped along with their friends and colleagues. Thank you so much for having me here. Congratulations on 50 years. Thank you very much.
It's pretty amazing to hear Ted's story and recognize that today we have more than 160 sessions, more than 100 CEU credits offered, and record attendance with nearly 2,000 attendees.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. John, many of the lectures that made up the past Academy annual meetings discussed research that was published in the Journal of Prosthetics and Orthotics, or as we like to call it, the JPO. Can you tell us a little bit about the origins of the JPO?
Certainly. When the Academy grew in the 80s from the foundation that Ted talked about, the boards began to focus on developing new educational opportunities that specifically targeted the interests of the individual frontline clinicians who were starting to have a voice in the affairs of the field. One example was a quarterly newsletter focusing on clinical P&O topics, which complemented the longstanding AOPA publication, Orthotics and Prosthetics. Under the editorship of Charles Pritham, CPO, this newsletter quickly increased in scope and content and soon became a full-fledged journal titled Clinical Prosthetics and Orthotics. In the late 80s, forward-thinking leaders in AOPA and the Academy voted to combine resources to create a single peer-reviewed publication, which we know as the Journal of Prosthetics and Orthotics, and it continues to grow and advance today under the editorship of Dr. Stephen Gard from Northwestern University.
Thank you, John. And I think it's perhaps worth mentioning that I was gifted my first copy of the JPO in 1994 by a clinician in Idaho Falls, Idaho, when I expressed a little interest in getting into the field. It was a special edition. I have a copy of it right here, 1992, volume 4, number 5, that summarized all of the academic programs at the time. That's where I first learned about the program at the University of Washington. I, of course, had no idea at the time that I would go on to spend 10 years on the editorial board of the JPO. But pivoting to another topic, can you tell us a bit more about how other Academy initiatives have contributed to this annual meeting?
Certainly. You mentioned the dedicated special issues of the JPO, and I think that's a great illustration. They were the first single topic publications in our field that provided clinicians with a handy reference volume summarizing contemporary thinking and evidence from a multidisciplinary perspective. I served as guest editor for one on pediatric prosthetics, and I can tell you that the key contributors were initially recruited based on their well-received presentations at earlier annual meetings. Other authors we identified from articles published by sister organizations, including the National Occupational and Physical Therapy Associations, the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, the Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation Academy, and our own International Society for Prosthetics and Orthotics. Many more special issue authors were later invited to present at our annual meetings, and some became ongoing contributors who ultimately received honorary membership in our academy. This synergy between the growth of the annual meeting and the education and the initiatives of the boards just continue to grow and amplify in each successive decade. And I've seen nearly 5 of them, and it's just amazing how far we have come and how far we can still go. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Terry, education is a mission-based foundation of the Academy and essential to the profession. There were some other important educational initiatives established during this period that were and continue to be part of the annual meeting. Can you talk to us a little about that?
Thanks, Phil. John Billick brought me in from the Midwest chapter to be the chairman of the continuing education conferences back in the 80s. And as part of our discussions there, we wanted to change the name of the national meeting, as John mentioned in the video, but we also wanted to expand the content that was in the meetings to go beyond just what was presented in the continuing education conferences that Ted mentioned. At the time, we wanted to also try to attract the younger members, and so we felt that the location of the meeting needed to be someplace that was more family-friendly. I'm not sure whether Chicago meets that real role, but that's where it was. That was also an era where the technological and the philosophical changes were occurring within the profession. And you see that the carbon fiber components, the issue containment designs, the CAD/CAM designs in prosthetics and for the reciprocator orthoses and the post-polio syndromes, and even dealing with the tone inhibitive castings and the changes in the designs of AFOs were occurring during this time period. So what we felt was the impetus that the Academy needed to do as far as to really affect the scientific symposium part of the new title, to try to address the needs to be able to work within these areas, dealing with instructional courses, dealing with the technical workshops, primarily coming from the manufacturers, and doing professional development areas within the profession, as well as the abstract driven of the papers, the free papers that were given at the meeting and that. We brought in experts from ISPO to deal with international courses. We went from restricting the patient models who were exhibiting what they're wearing at the meetings to actually encouraging the Amputee Coalition to exist and to bring them into the fold, as well as bringing the VA's education program to make that as part of the Academy during the 90s and that. So, but going forward, yeah, we want to try to maintain President Billick's image as far as the rigid vision of the Academy. We want to make sure that the members were able to take advantage of the changes in education and utilized. And so if you see all the technological changes here at this meeting and that, we're trying to keep abreast of that to make sure that the Academy meeting and the scientific symposium continue. As I went through observing the evolution from the artisan, the craftsman, to the medical professional that Scott mentioned in his talk, we want to make sure that we remember that the patient care and the commitment to making their lives better needs to be our first priority as clinicians. Don't be struck by the technologies that is available now, because those are just tools to achieve that goal and not to replace it.
Very good, thank you. Now, the Academy Board just approved a new scientific society, that being the Bone-Anchored Prosthetic Society. And that brings the total to 10 scientific societies. They'll be meeting here this week. How did the Academy's scientific societies begin, and how important are they for the profession today?
Well, I'm glad to see that the Academy has taken up the initiatives with the creation of this new society. Direct bone attachment is going to be has a whole different set of challenges that we're going to be facing as clinicians in the prosthetics part of it. And actually, I had forgotten the fact that I had announced the creation of the first societies as during my meeting in San Diego. And that Dan Ferguson, who's the son of Joe Ferguson of the Titus Ferguson Award achievement, approached the board in 1990 to look at trying to develop the societies. In fact, his father, Joe, had come up with the original idea shortly before after the Academy was formed to create the societies. And Dan was able to share with me the notes that Joe actually wrote down when he thought about the creation of the society and what its goals needed to be. And he was able to share that with me this last couple of weeks. It took a couple of years for the first societies to be created, the first 4 of them. And so it's really great to see that Joe's initial concept has been carried forward with this brand new society that we've been forming.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that. Now I have a question for Stephanie, the first female president of the Academy. One of the hallmarks of the Academy is membership today is becoming a fellow of the Academy. The first class of Academy Fellows was inducted at the 1998 Academy Annual Meeting in Miami during your term as president-elect, and you were part of that class. Can you tell us about why and how that designation was originally created?
Thank you, Joanne. Well, in line with the mission of the Academy for education and the advancement of the members' knowledge and professionalism, we saw a need and an opportunity to create specific programs with focused topics for sharing advanced information. The certificates for professional development were then created to be a set of presentations given by the leading experts and specialists in the field on specific areas of interest, like orthotic management of cerebral palsy and prosthetic foot and ankle mechanisms. And there are about 12 others that are currently available. So to recognize those who have made the extra commitment to their personal and professional advancement by completing these certificates, the designation of Fellow of the American Academy of Orthotists and Prosthetists was then created to be awarded to those who put in that extra effort and completed those certificates.
So we've seen multiple fellowship classes since the beginning, and the addition of the Fellow with Distinction. During Friday's Academy member business meeting, we will be inducting 4 new fellows and 3 fellows with distinction. How do you feel the fellowship designation, how do you feel about the fellows designation today?
Well, the additional designation of becoming a fellow with distinction shows a continued effort by the practitioner to give back. They have made outstanding contributions to the profession in the ways of publishing, presentations, nationally and internationally, and serving on the leadership boards. Those that have made that extra effort to support the Academy mission can earn their D for distinction to be added to their fellow credential.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let's check in briefly with our graphic recorder's progress. Can we pull that up?
No.
That's interesting. I've never seen one before.
I know.
Wendy. Thank you very much, Jill. Fellowship is an individual accomplishment. The Academy has a history of partnership, building both externally with other organizations and internally with the development of various groups where like-minded clinicians can gather for growth and support. Some of the most successful groups include the Women's in O&P effort, which has grown and evolved into the Collaborative on Inclusion, Action, and Engagement, and the Alliance, which are both participating in the meeting this week. Can you tell us a little of the story behind why these groups were started?
Okay. So shortly before one of the Academy meetings, there was lack of communication between us and another of the organizations. And this other organization thought that we had undermined their position on one of the initiatives they were doing. And they faxed, that tells you how long ago it was, all of the people who are going to be attending the meeting, and we arrived at our annual meeting with a hostile crowd. The first day down there, we had a town hall, and usually town halls have like a handful of people. Remember, we're not giving out alcohol, so it's usually quite sparsely attended. Well, this was standing room only, and the only reason that the participants didn't have pitchforks with them was because of TSA, because it was after. So, and I was actually chair of the Professional Issues Committee. So I had this huge target on my forehead. And for those of you who were at that meeting, you can cringe along with me. Anyway, it was incredibly uncomfortable, but it gave us an opportunity to actually demonstrate what we were doing and why we were doing it, and how actively the Academy was engaged with other members of the healthcare profession. And it also revealed how poorly our communication between the organizations were. So the Alliance came into being, and the Alliance is a group that has representatives from all of the various organizations that represent orthotics and prosthetics. And it allows us to streamline our responses, to coordinate efforts and not duplicate efforts, and really for us to understand what's going on a more global level than just within our own organization. And one of the examples of how effective the Alliance can be was actually when the LCD came through. Now, I think it was 2014? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, or not, or just live with it. So 2014, I'm saying. 2014, CMS in their infinite wisdom came up with a whole list of barriers to providing adequate care. I mean, it was draconian, and we had nothing to do with the development of it. You know, for prosthetic and orthotic care, we had nothing to do with it. So the Alliance sort of channeled our resources. We created a draft response to CMS. We contacted the ACA, and with our own patients and through the ACA, we got this huge petition with over 100,000 signatures, and we lobbied for the researchers whose names were used to create this to write a letter decrying the decision. And CMS capitulated and took it off the table. So this was a huge, huge win for us. I mean, I can't tell you what it would have meant for patient care. So, so that's the Alliance, and it's still functioning today. I am no longer on the steering committee, which makes me very happy. Long meetings. Anyway, and then women in O&P, when Stefan and I entered the profession, and Joanne, there were very few women in the field. I mean, I think there were 3 women in my prosthetics course and 5 in orthotics. And women in O&P was a chance for us to, and there was no women in leadership. So this was a chance for women to act as mentors to each other and to provide a home for the burgeoning women in the field, and provide, we set up a mentoring program, and it was really incredibly successful. So successful that now there's more than 50% of the people entering the field are women, and if you look at the leadership of the Academy and the other organizations, there are women at every level, which is yay. And it's gotten so big that they actually, instead of it being just women in P now, it's now the collaborative on, help me, inclusion and diversity and something
Action
else.
and engagement.
Darn.
Close, so close.
I got 2 of the words right, so there's that. But, you know, I think that any time that we're working together, it's better than we're working alone. And I think that that's really, both of these things, both the women in O&P and the Alliance really demonstrate that.
So you've really gave us a great history on the profession. Where do you see the next 50 years of the profession?
So first, I'm hoping I'm going to rotate off my last committee. That's not a joke.
Good luck with that.
Good luck with that, right? But I think that, you know, there's so much that's changed in the profession in the last, well, I wasn't here 50 years ago, despite the gray hair. I think that part of the change has been from a device-focused, how to make things, to a patient-focused, why we make them. And I think that's going to increase in the future. And I think that's part of the reason that more women are in the field. You know, the communication skills, the decision-making skills are all different than they used to be about which hammer to use. And I think that's going to increase. I think that as AI enters our field, we're going to have more time to spend with the patient and less on paperwork, which will be a benefit for everyone.
Thank you, Wendy. They liked it. Scott, the Academy's mission includes research, and it's come a long way since the creation of the Research Council. That's a highlight that I recall from our time overlapping together on the Academy board. Can you reflect a little bit on why the Research Council was initially created, and which Research Council resources you see as most relevant to today's clinicians?
Because our profession is an art and a science, the offerings at the Academy meetings around the year 2000, the early 2000s, with the emergence of evidence-based practice, the presentations began to change. Prior to that time, there was a lot of art in our presentations. And that's the how we do what we do as professionals. Since that time, there's been a slow progression to be more science involved, as Wendy just mentioned, the science or the why we do what we do. Around the same time, the State of the Science Conference initiative was launched. Although back then it was referred to as the Consensus Conference. Now it's the State of the Science Conference, the SSC. Academy leadership recognized the need for more of a scientific approach in what we do to provide patient care. So we transitioned the research committee to a research council. And that allowed us a more robust foundation to develop necessary deliverables for the use of members in providing care. One of the big focuses at that time was secondary knowledge sources. Critically appraised topics, CATs, we've heard about that, evidence notes, clinical knowledge summaries. All of those products, deliverables we call them, are designed to bridge the gap between the research world and clinical practice.
Very good, thank you. You mentioned the SSCs, and I'll share that one of the early honors of my career was being invited to participate in an SSC on microprocessor knees, and then given the opportunity to co-chair some others that followed. And it's encouraging to note that the Academy is not done in this space. There's an SSC that's currently being planned to study bone-anchored prosthetics. So Scott, as you reflect on the early beginnings of the SSCs to what is now a library that's available today, how do you see SSC content as a resource for today's practitioner?
I'd like to note first that our very own John Michael here at the other end of the row of panelists was instrumental in the Academy securing the first Department of Ed grants that funded the SSC initiative. And I think that bears a round of applause. To date, there have been 13 SSCs convened and published. The published findings act as a resource for clinicians to refer to when they want to include objective data along with their skill set in providing care. And the SSC information remains relevant. In fact, at this meeting, there are related topics on outcome measures, literature reviews, and scoping reviews being presented here for our consumption. And I believe it is terribly important for us to embrace this science in what we do, because the future of our profession hinges on whether we position ourselves to be providers of devices or providers of care.
Thanks, Scott. Jason, an unfortunate reality is that historically, the bursts that we see in O&P technology coincide with military conflicts. Your presidency aligned with a number of emerging technologies in the wake of Operation Iraq Freedom and Enduring Freedom. Can you speak to the relationship between military conflict and technology development in O&P?
Absolutely. I want to do one thing first if I can. Got to get this out of the way. Thank you to the Academy for putting this together and for the opportunity to sit here, especially by the guy that brought me into the Academy. Oh. Congratulations on the award, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you.
What a cool opportunity. To the subject of technology development aligning with conflict. So go with me here for a second. If part of a country's national strategy, national defense strategy, is to have projection of power, then they're going to probably need a robust military. If they're going to have a robust military, they're going to need a way to recruit and retrain the best service members, right? And so there's a lot of tools they can do to do that, incentivizing soldiers and so forth. But some of the most important things they can do is they can demonstrate a commitment, an ongoing commitment to technology development and for a means to provide the care that's necessary for service-related conflict. So that's kind of the train for how you get there. So I'm going to just kind of talk through a very quick, cursory, not exhaustive list of some technology as it relates to conflict era. But I just have to point out also that some of the innovations on the timeline, when you look back, are not so readily traceable directly to conflict. They happen to fall in the period, but some are very directly related to conflict. It's an important distinction. But so just to run through a couple of periods here. In the post-World War II and Korean War era, that would be the 40s to 50s, we saw the quad socket, PTB sockets, actually the use of check sockets, and related to that, the development of transparent materials to do the diagnostic work related to check sockets and evaluative fittings. Move forward to the Vietnam era, the post-Vietnam era, obviously the 1960s and 70s. You saw iteration on the PTB socket, like the PTS iteration, and like this. And then you started to see thermoforming, the blister forming that's kind of a mainstay today in a lot of places, but not every place, like at the Shrine, for example, right? That's gone digital, another innovation. But in the time between Vietnam and the Persian Gulf, we saw the advent of gel liners, ischio containment socket, energy storing feet, and then in the short time between the Gulf War and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the sea leg was invented and commercialized. And then that takes us to the most recent conflict for America, which was the 20-year war in Operations Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, New Dawn in Iraq and Afghanistan. That was a booming time where we saw the DECA arm, COAP system, power knee, a host of other microprocessor knees, the C-brace, the IDEO, naked fingers. And then there was a really important focus on residual limb improvement through procedural means and various surgeries. Some examples there would be osseointegration was discussed briefly earlier, implantable electrodes, targeted muscle innervation, and the innovation continues with things like fractional laser, scar resurfacing, and that sort of thing. The last thing I'll point out here, and you've heard a lot about it already, is that there were a number of advancements made in evidence-based practice in addition to these technologies. Some examples would be the focus and development of CPGs like those put out by the VA DoD, those put out by Hanger, for example. And finally, you saw the emergence of some different funding portfolios like DoD has put some out that are now challenged and so forth like that. So that's just a quick rundown. Yeah.
No, thank you. Excellent response. You alluded to many new and exciting emerging technologies that are seen here walking through our exhibit hall. Another related area is the need to develop and obtain outcomes data related to those technologies. Can you talk a little bit about that evolution and its significance?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, very related to a lot of the things that have been discussed. Some of the State of the Science conferences that you saw the titles for, great to see that layout. But basically, to demonstrate the impact of our professional care, and again, we've talked about the distinction between being a device provider versus a care provider. Hopefully, we're all starting to get into that mindset of being a care provider. But if you want to demonstrate the impact of the care you provide on the patient, then talking about a way to do that is very significant, relevant, important. And so certainly in the conflict era over the last 2 decades, there's been a boom in outcome measure development. There's no question. Same issue. Some of them you can see directly correlated to conflict and their development associated with that. Some of them not so readily, but just a few examples. The socket comfort score came out. These are all the ones I'll name here in the last 2 decades, we'll say. The socket comfort score, the orthotic prosthetic user survey was right at the very beginning of that. The PLUS-M, the PEQ with a host of variations, the amputee mobility predictor, the comprehensive high-level activity mobility predictor, the EQ5D, the list goes on. This is obviously not exhaustive. In addition to that, though, what's been pretty neat, not only the development of the outcome measures, but a means to assess if they're robust or not. So you've seen a proliferation in testing them for things like, well, basically their psychometric properties. Are they reliable? Are they valid? Are they sensitive? And then, if we really reach kind of the mountaintop in that domain, we're talking about normative data, kind of cut scores, minimal detectable change values, and that sort of thing. The last thing on this is that in addition to even that, there's been great interest in attempting to compile lists of what might be the air quotes around best outcome measure. Which one is the best? And we still really don't know, but there's some pretty cool resources to look to. For example, Linda Resnick at Brown University, dual appointed at the Providence VA, she compiled a very exhaustive systematic review with HHS funds. That's in the public domain, look it up. It's a great document. Again, some of the CPGs I just referenced either make reference to use an outcome measure in this patient domain or use maybe this specific outcome measure, okay? Less the latter, more the former. But in all honesty, these, again, in my opinion, represent enormous leaps forward in trying to sort of quantify the impact, ready for it, of the care that we provide, right? Drive that point home. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jason. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing such insightful information. We'd like to hear from you all now. Brian, do we have any questions from the audience?
First question, it's a personal question, and I'll address it to more than one of you. But what was the driving force or the impetus for you personally to get involved in Academy volunteerism? Scott, let's start with you.
I was fortunate enough to be at a running clinic with one of my patients, and it was fantastic to see amputees running for the first time since their amputation. Well, what I also saw was the amputees' family members in attendance, seeing the husband run for the first time or the dad run for the first time. And it really sunk in at that point that the two things, the Academy can make a huge difference in the lives of others, and it's not restricted to just the person we're treating. It was a great early lesson for me that we're treating the whole family with what we do. And so that was one of the driving forces of me getting involved.
Oh, that's great to hear, and I'd like to address the same question to Stephanie. What was the impetus? What was the catch that motivated you to get involved in uplifting your profession?
I think that when I was real new and maybe even a student, they had a meeting, Academy meeting in San Diego, and so I went with a bunch of friends because we were at Rancho, and I was just so overwhelmed by the people, the creativity, the exhibit hall, the lectures. It was just I was so enthusiastic about it that I just was hooked. And have really enjoyed being a part of the Academy since then.
It certainly is a memorable experience. I'd like to ask anyone to share a funny or outstanding memory that just pops into your mind when you think of past Academy meetings or maybe board meetings that you attended. What do you look back at and really laugh at?
My first Academy meeting was out in California, and that's where I had started my baseball cap collection. I have now over 600 of them from that point. So
Any other anecdotes?
yeah.
We talked about, you talked about how the makeup of our profession has changed and the diversity. Also, the membership of our academy has changed. We're seeing a lot more affiliate members, those that aren't CPOs. And just wanted to ask anyone if they have a vision for the future of how medical professionals such as physicians, physical therapists, allied healthcare professionals can have an impact and a role in our academy in the future.
I'll offer here maybe. I think we've been blessed. One of the videos that we saw early on, there was a reference made to this about other professionals coming in when we had these meetings. And I think we've been blessed over the years, at least that I've seen, that continues to be the case. And so when you look out across the kind of the landscape, the research footprint across the country, in a lot of cases, the funded research going on in the labs are multidisciplinary. And so I think that represents the nature of the work that we do, I think, catalyzes some organic interest and pulls other folks in. And I think that sometimes creates the draw to help get them here and they want to share. And so hopefully that continues. I think it's been great so far.
I have a two-parter, so we'll look back, unless anyone did it. No takers for that?
One thing I'd like to add is the importance of respecting what these folks bring to the table and the gaps that they fill in our practices. So I tend to focus in upper limb prosthetics, and I'm very clear to tell my patients, my job is to make a device that opens and closes when you tell it to. Denise's job is to help you make a sandwich. Right, and recognizing that to get the most out of the thoughtful interventions that we assemble for a patient, we need to give them access to the therapy resources that help them to maximize the utility of that device. We never want to lose sight of that and recognize that the thoughtful devices we provide become much more of an asset when they're given the training to maximize the value of the intervention.
Really cool. We're here celebrating our 50th Academy annual meeting. I have a question and reflecting back, and then I'll pitch it forward to 50 years in the future. Question for you, and John, I'll pose it to you. So what was the most exciting development in either technology or clinical techniques that in your time that you witnessed?
Wow.
What was really like the next best thing since sliced bread?
That's like asking which of my children do I love the most. Come on. What's been exciting is hanging around for now 48 years. Every year something exciting happened. And almost always it showed up here first.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Every year patient care moved forward. Every year we reached out more to other people. Every year we continued our tradition of craftsmanship and artisan work, but we moved more into patient management, and the deeper we got in patient management, the more we could collaborate with other people in the healthcare field. And I think it's felt like a rocket ship, to be real honest. And as far as I can tell, the trajectory is still 60 degrees or something. So I just think there was 1,000. If you have 3 hours and you want to buy me a beer, I'll talk to you.
Might take you up on that, but I won't tell your secret, but we know which one of your children is your favorite. We'll leave that at rest. So looking forward, 50 years into the future, I'm curious, and then this goes to anyone, what do you envision and what do you hope for to see for the academy and the O&P profession 50 years from now? Or what challenges do you see on the horizon that we need to work together with our professional colleagues to overcome?
Do you remember the end of the second Star Wars movie? We're all being replaced by robots? Really? Yeah.
thought.
Small commentary, we could be we replace missing limbs with robotic technologies, so
right.
you could flip that same movie and have a different perspective. So.
I was just going to maybe suggest that some of the things we continue at times to have to explain ourselves as a profession. And so at some point in the future, hopefully it's not 50 years, we can not do that. We can just accept it as a fact, right? Along those lines, there's no incentive to use outcome measures in our documentation. Forward-thinking clinicians, I think, are doing it. So there's a lot of interplay between how do we get to that incentive, between coding and reimbursement, recognition as a service provider instead of a DME benefit provider. So there's a lot of moving parts and interplay with that. It's a very complex problem, but maybe at some point in the future, we're talking about being recognized as a profession. We can quit having that conversation. We have proper incentives in place to use outcome measures. We can clearly quantify the impact we have on patients, and we are recognized as a service provider. Hopefully it's not 50 years.
So you've all heard what some of our panelists had to say about what the next 50 years of the profession has in store. Now we want to hear from you. Please visit the chalkboard wall at the Academy booth and share what you feel is in store for the next 50 years, because you're all part of it.